This is Robyn Rocket Zoom podcast, Danalogue Part 2. Hello, my name's Robyn Rocket and you're listening to Robyn Rocket Zoom podcast. Thank you for listening. This is part 2 of my podcast with Danalogue, who played in Soccer96 and The Comet is Coming. This interview is recorded in 2023 or late 2022. And yeah, we were chatting in part 1 about how he got into music and how he had the same teacher on sax as Rebecca Hutchins once a month at the Guildhall School of Music, how he met Max Hartlett, aka Betamax, who he played with in Soccer96 and The Comet is Coming. And in this episode, we're going to find out how Soccer96 started and a bit more about Dan. And I thought a good question, or a question I had, was where does the name Danalogue come from? So I thought we'd start this episode with that.
I actually didn't come up with it. I used to be in a group called DA10, and it was this great beat maker, used the MPC, called 10 David. He was one of the first guys that I met in Brighton who just had like a moniker. He was like, yeah, I'm 10 David. We got like 10 fingers and thumbs. And he used on MPC. I was like, 10 David. Sick. Okay. And we were in a group together called DA10.
MPC stands for Music Production Centre. It's a sampler. A sampler is a piece of equipment you can use to record bits of music or sound effects and then manipulate them, like speed them up or slow them down. And samplers are used a lot in hip hop.
It's 10 David who came up with the name Danalogue. And it's just like, because I'm always banging on about analog synths, basically. And he was like, Danalogue. And I was just like, yeah, just stuck immediately. And I think I love the idea of like old equipment, because it's kind of like we live in such a world now where everything gets thrown away as soon as something new's been invented. And I love the idea of like it's still got so much to give, and you can still make something fresh on these old keyboards. And I wanted that to be part of my name. Just the reuse of old tools is a beautiful thing. I think there's still some DA10 music out there. There was a great track called Redshift, which DJ Shadow once played on Radio 1, and that was one of the most exciting days of my life at that point. I remember we were like, DJ Shadow just played Redshift on Radio 1, and we were freaking out because like one of his heroes was DJ Shadow. He was like, my hero of MPC production is playing our MPC produced track right now. Can't say enough how much like artists who like support other artists by playing their music, just one of the greatest things you can do for a young up and coming artist, because it just validates what you're doing and makes you so excited to keep going and make more music.
If you know Danalogue's work, you probably know that he plays with Soccer96 and The Comet is Coming. The Comet is Coming aren't doing any gigs at the moment because Rebecca Hutchins isn't playing sax in public. But before Dan was in Soccer96, he, in part 1 of this podcast, talked about being in a 6-piece, and then when that ended, thinking, who shall I ring up? And thinking, I should ring up Max. But being in a 6-piece is really different to being in a duo, and I just wondered what the thought process was behind, like, how did you go from being in a 6-piece to being in a duo? Like, musically, how did you approach that?
I was like, what if we just reduce it down to something very, very simple? And also, I was really into Square Pusher, and the drums were so mad. And I feel like Max had so many chops, but in a lot of the bands I'd seen him in, he was playing more like tracks with like beats, which still demonstrated his talents. But I was just like, it's Square Pusher, he just doesn't, just like the beats are so mad. In his tracks with live drums, like Iambic 9 Poetry, like that track, it's live drums and they're so mad. And I was just like, look, if I could just set up some kind of sonic worlds for it quite simply, and then you just do your thing. Man, it was liberating, I should say, I reckon, at that point. So like I remember our third gig was with a full Cafe OTO crowd, because it was at Max's dad's 60th birthday, and Max's dad is Clive Bell, quite a legend actually, and all of his friends were like the coolest kind of avant-garde composers and free improvisers. So I only knew that before we went on stage, which was his kitchen. Quite a few people were asking me what synths I was playing and whether I built them myself. Have you built them yourself? I was like, no, And then I remember one guy saying that he'd just made a concerto or like a suite of music for pebbles that he found on the beach. And I was like, oh boy, I'm about to play a load of major 7 chords on a Roland Juno. So brace for impact. But actually, I think it went down rather well, yeah.
So that's how Soccer96 started. Like, you were in Brighton, Soccer96 was starting, you were doing pretty well. How did you come up to London? How did that move happen?
Like, we were doing a lot of shows in London at the time, and I was finding them quite exciting. And I think then the TRC happened, basically. Total Refreshment Centre opened.
The TRC, or Total Refreshment Centre, is art studios in North London. It used to have a venue downstairs and they used to put on gigs. And it's where I now have a studio.
There was no way I wasn't going to be there, because after a while, I heard about it through 3 different portals when it was still like Alexi had just got in there, just opened the door.
Alexi is Alexi, or Lex Blondin, who was like founder of Total Refreshment Centre.
Jack, who I lived with, but he got given the schematics, the kind of blueprint of the place by Alexi. And then Max was invited in there by Alexi. And then I also knew Raymond, who was invited to do shows there. Fate pulled me into the TRC, basically. And then I started being there so much that I wasn't even going home to Brighton anymore. I'd just go home like once a month to wash my clothes, and then I'd just sofa surf and sleep in different people's basements and stuff. And I just knew I had to be around there and record and do shows, just be at the Total Refreshment Centre. And then eventually I was like, I need to just move up here. It's just the energy and the creative people there was so good. Brighton can be, sorry Brighton, but Brighton can be a bit like, you can book a session and then someone can just like cancel it because they got too high. Whereas I feel like in London, you don't cancel sessions. Yeah. And I just needed to be in a place where everyone was like, felt like there's a lot of creative urgency, you know, and that was really enticing.
Do you remember the first time you went to TRC?
One of the first times we went there was to record. And at the time, some of the people, the talk rumbling around was that what's now the studio was going to be like a dance studio. And everyone had different ideas about what the space was going to be, what was going to happen there. And there was a big mirror in the studio. So everyone's like, oh, it's a dance studio. We'll do like dance stuff. I think Alexi thinks in this wonderful way where he was just like, oh, we just need some musicians in there because that'll be cool. And I was like, well, let's just record some stuff then. This can be a recording studio. And I think like we recorded the first ever thing in there with Jack, one of my oldest friends. He kind of helped set some stuff up, and Christian brought in some stuff.
So I'm very curious, in a lot of your work there seems to be a sort of space theme. Where does your interest from space come from? Just
like being obsessed basically with space. Oh, like when I have some spare time to myself, which is like kind of rare at the moment, but when I wanted to just sit down and like, what do I want to do outside of music? My extracurricular pattern was to get really into people talking about like the cosmos and like the universe, either scientists or philosophers, either someone like Carl Sagan or someone like Terence McKenna or Alan Watts, who are getting a bit more to like psychedelic kind of philosophies. And what would happen is it would blow my mind, and then I'd feel like really creative. Like it was like a key to access, to get outside of my mundanity, which is feel like I need inspiration that's like absolutely huge to stop me just doing like the most boring stuff. Like we spend most of our time like having a shower and you're having lunch, and then you just got to go to work, and then you're doing this and then you're checking your emails. And I just feel like something about looking at like the macrocosm of like existence, which just like I'm just like, oh, I really want to make music right now. So yeah, normally that if I'm not doing something like making a coffee, normally my brain is quite out in the clouds, really, I guess. So when you were at school, did you ever think you might work in space or physics? I actually wanted to be work with reptiles for a long time. So I was super into Steve Irwin, who's the crocodile wrangler. Well, not a wrangler. He used to rescue crocodiles essentially from land where they were going to get shot by farmers. A true hero of conservation. And I loved animals a lot when I was growing up. So yeah, I used to work in a reptile shop. I had lots of reptiles in my room. So I used to breed them in my room. So at one point I was either going to work at Australia Zoo. That was my mission, get out to Steve Irwin Zoo and work there as a reptilologist, or get into music. And so somewhere out there is a parallel universe where I'm wearing khakis, shorts, and wrangling carpet pythons.
And what do you think swung it so that you became a musician?
Yeah, I have no idea. I think it was probably pretty random. Maybe it was just more fun. Like, I feel like, yeah, all my pals were making music and I was hanging out. But when I was at the reptile shop, there's some quite problematic characters who are into dangerous animals, you know. And also I think I gradually became aware that we're putting animals in cages, even if they're really big, really well-made, beautiful homes. It's still a little bit weird, isn't it? Keeping animals in cages. I was more up for more sonic freedom, less animal cages.
You've been listening to Robyn Rocket's Zoom Zoom podcast. I'm Robyn Rocket. I'd like to thank Dan for being my guest, and thank you to you for listening. Thank you to the executive producer Paul Dutnall and Arts Council England for the funding that made this project possible. Bye-bye.